Hi, this is Janet Fitch, and it is noon on Wednesday, so it must be Writing Wednesday when I answer your writing questions, your craft questions, your, um, different aspects, all aspects of writing, your personal questions, writing life, um, business aspects. All aspects of writing belong here. So if you have questions for me during the week, you can contact me through my website, janetfitchwrites.com, and send me your question. I can design a Writing Wednesday around your question. And if you have questions today, put them in the chat, and I will be happy to answer them as we go along. So, today we have a question from the internet and from through my website from Destiny. And Destiny asks, what are the common mistakes writers make with dialogue? And do you have any favorite exercises for improving dialogue? So dialogue, as many of you know, dialogue I always think in terms of the dialogue scene rather than just dialogue isn't just this. Dialogue is um, has all the elements of writing plus people speak. So it is in many ways you can think of it as the um, my writing teacher used to say it's the triple axle of writing, where you have to do everything, plus people emit spoken word dialogue. So, what are the elements of a scene? The elements of a scene are there's landscape, there's internals, there's reactions, there's movement, there's light, smells, sounds, colors. Um, there's in a dialogue scene there something happens in a dialogue scene where the person cannot go back to the way it was before. So that's the essence of a dialogue scene is it's got all the things that a scene has, including the change where people cannot go back to the way it was before, um, and people emit spoken word as well as everything else. So it's keeping all the spinning plates in the air is an essential part of the dialogue scene. And um, it's where you really show that you've mastered all the aspects of fiction writing, that you can keep a world going um, and have people put pressure on each other. Because what is dialogue um, especially for? Um, we've talked about this in other episodes, but you know, in brief, what dialogue is for is people putting pressure on each other. Somebody wants something else, and the dialogue is what puts pressure on the characters, put pressure on each other, and then you find out a lot about the characters, you find out about the power relationship, who's stronger, who's going to win, who's going to lose. Um, Not everybody gets what they want in a dialogue scene. It's it's to show the power relationships, and something happens, and somebody wins and somebody loses. Um, and take a look at good dialogue scenes in literature, in all your literature. I like to look at the dialogue scenes in Play It As It Lays by Joan Didion, because she was a screenwriter and the dialogue is really compressed. You can see that when I see a long chugga, 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 chugga down the page, I can see somebody who hasn't been working very hard on their dialogue. I like to see uh, interaction, like a 3-line exchange, 5-line exchange, and then come out into the world and then go back in, more like the way cats fight. They come in and then then they break apart. And then they come in and then they break apart. Those long chugging lines of dialogue are often people, when you see that, you're seeing people who are putting in a lot more verbiage than necessary. A silence properly handled says a lot more than just a ping-pongy response. Why did you do that? You promised me you would never do that. And you can have the person, you know, ping pong back. Oh, I didn't mean to. And then the other person ping pongs back. But what's more interesting is like, why did you do that? You promised you never would. Hi, Jennifer. Um, and the other character doesn't respond. Well, that's a power position. The silence, the person who controls the silence controls the scene. Because they decided not to send the ball back. So it's up to them when they're going to send it back, what they're going to answer, what they're not going to answer. Hi, Jennifer. Jennifer says, do you mean long paragraphs of one person speaking or long ping pong? Long ping pong. It's just, it shows that um, the compression in the dialogue is one of the hallmarks of good dialogue, that you know when to use uh, other tools like the silence, like observation, like internals, where internals meaning the point of view character watches the other person. So not only hears what they say, but sees what they're doing and has thoughts about it. Um, a long paragraph of one person speaking. I just finished Murakami's The Wind Up Bird Chronicle. That's all tales being told by characters, like almost chapter long told stories. Um, and that's a kind of a story within a story. It's not really dialogue, because dialogue is two people talking and putting pressure on each other. Murakami's protagonist is very passive, so he's a good person to be the recipient of a told story. Um, I think that paragraphs of one person speaking is usually somebody telling a story. Um, and it's helpful to have the recipient of that story, usually the protagonist, having thoughts about that person as they're relating. They also keep the world going, because um, as soon as somebody emits dialogue, the world doesn't stop. I'm talking, but there's still I can hear the freeway out there, cars going by down at the bottom of the hill. I can hear bird song. I probably could hear the refrigerator if it was chunking some ice. Or uh, you want to keep the world going in a dialogue scene, and often people forget to do that. Um, but the tight interaction of a 5-line exchange of dialogue, a 3-line exchange of dialogue, and then break apart, and then have the world as the person's taking in what the other person said. It doesn't need to be this chugga 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 down the page, and usually that shows that the world has disappeared, internal thought has disappeared, Climate has disappeared, light has disappeared, the world has disappeared, people have disappeared, and there's just this sound, blah, 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 blah. Hi, Jill. So, in the question that Destiny has asked, um, what common mistakes writers make with dialogue? Well, so the most common is that they forget to keep the world going, the internals going. When you're in conversation with someone, the protagonist, your point of view character, is observing the other person. They can get more from what the person doesn't say as what they can from what they do say. Anybody who's been to a foreign country and managed to get along without a scrap of that foreign language, you, that gesture, facial expression carry so much information that we forget, mainly because people tend to equate, especially dialogue, with what they see on TV and what their daily interaction is. The thing about dialogue is, hi, Sarah. The thing about hi, Jill. The thing about dialogue is that the recipient of all dialogue is the reader, not the other person in the scene. So you want to continue to interest the other person. You want to interest the reader. You Common mistakes. Okay, they don't keep the world going. They don't have thoughts. They don't have observations. Blended in, they often think in terms of blocks. So they have a block of description, often at the head of the scene, and then just ping pongy ping ping, what I call strip dialogue. No thought, no landscape, no nothing. And then another block of description, and then another. So try not to think of blocks, think of putting it in the blender so that you do it all at once. You keep the plate spinning. The world continues to exist, people continue to have thoughts, and they manage to emit dialogue. Let's see, the second common mistake writers make with dialogue is they say too much and there's not enough concision, there's not enough compression in the dialogue, meaning they use 10 lines of dialogue where they really only need one or two. Um, think of the dialogue scene. This was another Kate Braverman brilliant analogy is think of dialogue scene as a sundae. And so you have the ice cream, and you have the hot sauce, and you have the bananas, and you have the whipped cream, and then you have the nuts on top. And the proportion of utterance to all of the other tools of the dialogue scene should be, the spoken word is not the ice cream, it is not the chocolate sauce, it is not the bananas, it is not the whipped cream, it is the nuts. So really think about paring your dialogue down to the essential stuff that's only about the pressure that people are putting on each other. In life, there's a lot of chit chat. We want to show, hi, my neighbors, you stop and have a little chat. But, you're not necessarily going to tell them everything that's going on. You're trying to get out of there with as little friction as possible. Whereas in dialogue is about the conflict. If there's no conflict, you don't need anybody to say anything. You don't need dialogue with the guy you're buying a donut from because there's no pressure and there's no change. There's no point in having people speak. And then you start the dialogue with the stuff that's building conflict. So, Mrs. Moore, say Mrs. Moore comes over to complain about my son or my daughter doing something trash day. See, The world continues. Um, so the neighbor comes over to complain about my kid who's been, um, you know, using a BB gun and shot out their window or something like that. So you know, I don't know that. I just know Mrs. Moore is here, and it's like, hi, Mrs. Moore, come in and have some coffee. How's your husband? Oh, my husband's fine. We don't need it. What we need is, Mrs. Moore comes to the door, and I say, hello, Mrs. Moore, and she doesn't answer. And then she says, do you know where your son is? And maybe I have no idea where my son is. No. And then Mrs. Moore is going to lay on what the problem was. She doesn't need to do it in active dialogue either. I can cut to the chase by having exposition. Mrs. Moore lays out the crimes that my son has recently committed, putting a bullet through her window, and scaring the chickens, and she doesn't have to do that in active dialogue. The pressure is like, what are you going to do about it? And then I'm thinking about what my relationship to Mrs. Moore is, what my relationship to my responsibility for my son is. Maybe I'm an alcoholic and I just want to get back and finish my drink in peace without all this bullshit about my son, gonna lay it off on my husband, yeah, that kid's been a problem for a long time. And then what I say to her, what do I want from her? Do I want to mollify her? Um, this is my Lent has joined us. Hi. Um, it's the pressure that we put on each other. So maybe Mrs. Moore isn't going to be so quickly gotten rid of. Well, what are you going to do about it? And maybe I went to high school with Mrs. Moore's kid, who was a real jerk. And, it's like, you know, I don't feel like being nice to Mrs. Moore. And then we're going to have a head to head and see who wins. Is it Mrs. Moore threatening to uh, call the authorities? Is it, do I remember that her husband's laid up and hasn't been out of the house in 4 years? Do I soften in my approach to her? That's what happens in a dialogue scene. Something changes. Um, so the mistake people make is the doing that ping pongy thing and just letting the dialogue march down the page. No conflict in the dialogue, then you don't need the scene, probably, if there's no conflict in the dialogue. If people agree, that's a huge problem because there's no conflict, you know. Oh, they're going to tear down this theater, and I'm going to be on a crusade to uh, make sure that they don't. And then the person I'm talking to goes, I agree, that was a great theater, blah, blah, blah. And so we're all agreeing, that's a scene that's going nowhere. Don't need it. But if the other person said, oh, that theater, that it's a ruin, it's terrible, they should, it's a hazard, a kid got hurt in there playing, I mean, they should tear it down. Then you have conflict. So when you find your characters getting along too well, they're not your friends, they're characters, and they're designed to for conflict. So look at that. That's another mistake people make with dialogue. Um, a lot of meet and greet. Hi, how are you? That's the way people are in real life. But in dialogue, you don't need anybody to talk until you get to the point of the conflict. All that meet and greet, Mrs. Moore, I bring Mrs. Moore in to the the kitchen, which is cleaner than the living room. I notice her looking around. You don't have to have her say anything. When we get into the kitchen, I don't have to ask her if she wants coffee. I just pour the coffee. We sit by the window, and she begins to tell me about my son's latest, trespass. I need this like a hole in the head. And the dialogue, the utterance will begin with how I'm going to deal with this, how I'm going to put pressure on her, or how she's putting pressure on me, what I'm doing about that pressure, um, will be the gist of the scene. Exposition in the dialogue is a mistake that people make, where talk about, they tell information um, this way that is unnecessary. In a novel, unlike a play where everything has to be said, um, in a novel we can be inside a character's head, so we know you can just tell us, get us up to speed. Mrs. Moore, um, tells me about Jimmy's latest. Oh my God, and he did this, and he did this, and he did this. And so you go back to the dialogue for what are you going to do about it? Don't give me any bullshit now. I've had it. Um, and then you're going to have some good dialogue. Keeping the dialogue lean, um, thinking in terms of bursts of dialogue rather than chugga, 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 you know. Um, a 3-line, a 5-line burst of dialogue is very helpful. And that's a good exercise. Destiny was wondering about favorite exercises for improving dialogue. And it is getting characters into a conflict rich scene, and then doing a 3 or a 5-line exchange of dialogue. So somebody says something, somebody replies, and the third line should tell us about the power relationship. So one of the setups I used to use when I was teaching teaching this in workshop, is 2 boys sitting outside the principal's office, and they've been called in for some infraction, and the dialogue between the boys, a 3 or 5-line exchange where you really see the conflict delineated. You better not say anything, Billy. And then what does Billy say and what does Bobby say? And then you're going to get a very clear picture of the nature of the conflict and who's going to prevail. So that's a super good exercise for any kind of scene that has a conflict situation. Then pick the 2 people who are going to be acting out your scene, and what do they say to each other? A girl who has a crush on a girl's boyfriend calls her to find out about something, and she wants to know about the boyfriend, but doesn't want to let on to their friend that they've got a thing for the boyfriend. That's a really good conflict situation. And then just do the 3 or 5-line exchange. Another really good exercise is to grab the silence. Grab the silence. So, for instance, Jimmy, instead of ping pong, you teach yourself to throw in a silence. It'll disrupt that pattern. So, say Jimmy has done something, I don't know. His mother comes in. He's sitting there, you know, zoning out, looking at an airplane on his ceiling or whatever. And his mother comes in and starts, ranting, why did you do this? And that's the other thing about long paragraphs of one person speaking that Jennifer had talked about earlier in this session. Um, a long paragraph of one person speaking and the other person not um, is a power position. Parents get to do that, teachers get to do that, doctors get to do that. It's a prerogative of authority. So your boss gives you a long speech, but you don't give your boss a long speech, because that's part of the power dynamic. So here's the Jimmy's mother, haranguing him about something he did, and maybe, well, how does he respond? Okay, maybe he gives a lame excuse of why he didn't do, and then she starts in again, blah, 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 and she asks him a question, and instead of answering, he looks out the window, and maybe he sees another kid on his bicycle, just carefree and happy and riding around, and just wish that he would be out there with that kid. That's a silence. And then when he feels like speaking, it begins, the power relationship has changed. The aspect has changed. The situation has changed. And he goes back to the mother and says something else. Or sometimes they don't say anything at all. Are you really going out wearing that? A girl who says nothing and then just leaves or keeps putting her lipstick on, that really ratchets up the conflict. Are you really wearing that? And the girl just keeps putting her lipstick on. I mean, a certain kind of a parent would absolutely explode at something like that. Um, Answer me when I talk to you. And then maybe slowly she would look over at her parent and then look back. I mean, gesture is so much more powerful than than a line of dialogue, And if you can get a hold of gesture and facial expression, um, you can eliminate a lot of dialogue, which is super memorable, you know, and just like, and somebody just snaps their finger and that's it, you know. It's a great, it's a great way of handling things. A dialogue, good dialogue has a rhythm to it. So it's nice if you have a scene where a big mistake people make in a dialogue scene, and I've talked about this at other times, um, is that they have two people talking over a dinner table. They go to a restaurant and they have a conversation. I hate those scenes. Um, how much better to have characters doing something together, washing the dishes, or one character washing the dishes, making breakfast. So then they talk, they turn the pancakes over, um, it breaks up the dialogue. The other person has to wait for them to say their piece. People who are doing something together, like even playing video games, washing dishes, going for a walk. Uh, there's a there begins to have a rhythm to the scene that's very useful. Favorite exercises in improving dialogue. Um, People don't speak the same way. It's very useful to know what your establish the characters' patterns of speech, and it shows, you shouldn't even need to have he said, she said. You should know by what they're saying and the way they're saying it and the word choice and the diction level. You should know who's speaking. Um, you can do, if you keep thinking of putting everything in the blender and making sure you have, say, landscape and sounds, and um, you can use these for, instead of he said, she said, uh, attributions. Some people use attributions kind of rhythmically, da 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 da, he said, da da da, she said, da da da, and I know people who do that. But you can also eliminate them with gesture attributions or landscape attributions, which mean um, I'm never going to get out of here. We're at the dock, and it's like, I'm never going to get out of here. Um, she watched the boats in the distance vanishing over the horizon. So we know it was her who spoke, and this will be on the same line. We know it was her who spoke because she's the one who's watching those boats. Um, that's a landscape attribution. You can do a gesture attribution. Um, you know, Mom, I'm going to be leaving with Jimmy. She cleared her plate, or she, you know, twirled, braided her. She bit her fingernail, or you use, anyway, different kinds of attribution. Action shows attribution, or also you can do internals for attribution. So I'm afraid I'm going to be leaving um, this weekend, and I'm not coming back. You know, Jennifer thought her mother looked very old. So we know it's Jennifer because she had the thought that goes with it. Um, what other mistakes do people make um, with dialogue? Where everybody sounds the same, you know, or where it's the kind of thing people say doesn't match with who they are, their level of diction or their level of the pace. I mean, everybody takes a certain kind of a breath. Some people are very vigorous. They take a good breath. They are very forceful in the way they speak. They're end a sentence with a period. They know what they're talking about. They know where they're going. Um, some people are kind of drifty and they trail off, dot, dot, dot. They can't finish a sentence. They lose their place. Um, that's a different kind of a person. Some people are sick and they don't take a good breath, and it's hard to get a short sentence out. Some people are kind of the stiff upper lip, tough guys, and they don't say much because um, they've learned not to betray themselves very much. Um, and then you pick their you know, the way they see the world is strained through who they are. So if I'm a plumber, I might have plumbing metaphors or water metaphors or clogs, you know, in the way I describe things. I if I had a hard time once. I was looking. There was a film company that wanted to adapt uh, Paint It Black uh, into a screenplay and market it. And they showed me their script, and they had a punk rock girl um, saying stuff like, "Oh my God," It's like the the pitch, the diction was Valley Girl, and this was a 1981 punk rocker. they did not read the character correctly, so the dialogue was wrong. Everything was wrong because dialogue starts with character and who the character is and what their diction is. Uh, are they somebody who, bless their heart? Are they someone that's son of a bitch? Are they somebody who they mix up their metaphors? Um, everybody speaks differently. There is no such thing as a generic human being, so there's no such thing as a generic piece of dialogue. So that's a mistake that people make. And a good exercise for that would be to have four different people say the same thing, but have them say it in their own way. In any exchange of dialogue, you show the difference between people by how they speak. So if Johnny has come to pick up Linda for a date, and the TV 50s dad is in the living room with his paper, and you know he'd say, "Hello, Johnny," and Johnny might say, "Hey, Mr. B, what's up?" Uh, uh, got it, and he's like, "Well, how's school?" Maybe he tries to engage the young man in some sort of a conversation, and the kid is like, "Gotta go, Mr. B," and just get out of there. So you show the difference in dialogue, how people interact. So here's Moonlight Dreams. Uh, I don't know your name, so so you're going to be Moonlight Dreams. Are you always using the five senses with dialogue? How do you know what's the right one to use in dialogue? It depends on what you need. So if I am having a conversation with, say, my daughter who is cooking, and uh, it's like what I would notice would be the smell of the onions cooking. Um, I would see the steam rising, the kitchen filling with steam, or a smell I don't like. Maybe she's cooking cabbage, and it's going to linger in the air for a long time. So you know what the right sense is, because you think about what kind of a break I need and what's going on in the world, what's going on in landscape, what's going on in the room, what's going on outside of the room, what am I touching. So the layers of landscape come in there, the master shot, what's outside, the personal space, which is the room, and then the intimate space, which is your hands. What, like peeling a label, or uh, touch is always on the intimate level. So things very close to the body. Um, so what's the right one to use in dialogue? Say my teacher's yelling at me, or lecturing about something really boring, or mostly think of her calling me on the mat, like being a real difficult person, putting pressure on me. Maybe I'm not saying anything, but I'm carving, bad words into the tabletop that she can't see. So that would be a physical touch type of gesture. So you use whatever is going on. You'll think of it. Like, you ask yourself, if you look at any scene, any writing, dialogue or not, if too much time has gone on and you haven't identified where the light's coming from, what things look like, where light is falling, it's a good way to describe physical objects. If you haven't had a sound for a page or two, you need a sound. You need some texture. People don't exist in the vacuum. So you always have to keep us in the world. Um, when there's a pause, when people fall silent, When there's a silence, you never have to say they fell silent. You just have to hear something they wouldn't hear otherwise. Geese flying outside. Little kids are getting out of nursery school, and I can hear their little voices outside. Um, and that would be especially interesting in a scene where I'm having maybe family problems with an adult child, and I hear little tiny kids out there getting out of nursery school. So that would be a great thing to put into a dialogue scene. Um, what else can I tell you about dialogue? Other common mistakes. People, if they're not actively involved in the scene, people are landscape. So if there are people present but not talking, uh, then you treat them like the room, that they exist and you see them every once in a while, but they're not about the conflict. So they're not really characters in that scene. You don't have to worry about them too much. And when you have multiple characters in a scene, like in a bar or at a party, it's hard to have more than, I think, a very complex scene would be 8 people who all have speaking roles. And it can be done, the multi character dialogue scene, even 4 characters is a lot. Um, you have to, they all have to have their part in the scene. They all have their opinion. They all have their point of view. They all have their way of speaking, um, and offer. Usually, with groups of people, there's alliances, and then uh, interpersonal conflict between different little groups within the assembled. And I still recommend Denise Nicholas, Freshwater Road. The second chapter is a bar scene where there are 8 characters and they all have points of view, and there are alliances, and there's people who are sort of secretly want to see the other people fail. They have grudges. Some people are petty, and some people are kind of noble. Um, some people are kind of sidekicky. They're alliances. So some people are like the the it's the main protagonist is the owner of this bar, but he has the bar keep. The bartender is um, his employee. So he's sort of more of a sidekick, like he's not going to contradict the boss, but he'll have his own point of view. And there's the clients who know each other, some of them, and some of them don't know each other that well. Some are kind of skanky, one woman especially, kind of skanky and vengeful a little, wants to see things go awry. She's a chaos agent. And then there's 2 men who are friends who are at a table, and then they have an alliance, but they also have a part in the larger conversation. It's a very difficult thing to do. If you can avoid the multi-character dialogue scene, it is harder than 2 people. I always, even at a party, I try to kind of have 2 people have an interaction, and then one of them will look over and see her friends over there, but they're not active in the conversation. 4 people, even 4 people is a lot. But if you can, you're going to have to do it from time to time. So it's a good thing to learn. Another really good short story to study the multi character dialogue scene is a Robert Stone story in Bear and His Daughter, which is his collection of short stories, called uh, Porque no tiene porque la Volta, which takes place in Mexico. And it opens as a 2-person scene, husband and wife. not getting along very well. And then they're seeing their interaction uh, presages the entrance of a true antagonist. So the wife kind of admires this other expat who's been hanging around. And so they talk about him. And so we know that he's coming. But the next person we see is not him, but his sidekick, who is a very dangerous person. So we know that the guy himself is a really dangerous person if this is his sidekick. Um, then he's just a wild character. And then they have the four of them. And the kind of cross character conflicts are wonderful in that book. So take a look. So what else? What's your favorite conflict scene in fiction? Do you guys have a favorite uh, uh, author or book for the dialogue? I always like that Stone story. Stone is wonderful, and his multi-character dialogue scenes are wonderful. Here's another. I wouldn't call them mistakes, but I would call them difficult scenes. It's very hard to get conflict going between people who don't know each other. Strangers, it's very difficult to get a good dialogue scene with strangers because they don't know enough to really react to each other. It's hard to ramp up the conflict between strangers, whereas family members, there's a wonderful exchange in True West, the Sam Shepard play, where, who kills each other the most? Family people, mothers, brothers. So, yeah. So the better people know each other, the less they have to say because the other person is tracking. If I say to my daughter, "Are you really going to wear that? Is that what you're wearing?" All I have to say is that what you're wearing? I can put her into the stratosphere by saying something like that. I can, if you say to your husband, make sure to shake that, the orange juice or whatever, make sure to shake that. And you've said that every day, every time you see him with the orange juice, you tell him to shake it. So all I have to do is say, did you shake it? He's going to kill me. He's going to go insane. So the better people know each other, the better the dialogue, because they don't have to say much. Look at O'Neill, Long Day's Journey into Night. I really okay. Oh, Moonlight Dreams. Moonlight Dreams. What's your name? I hate to be calling you that. Um, asks, what could make a meet and greet scene interesting or stand out? Never. It never does. Destiny, this is your question. Very cool. All right. What could make a meet and greet scene interesting or stand out? Um, you have to avoid all the things that you would normally say to people and strike conflict. So usually these are people who are spoiling for a fight in the first place. So the meet and greet, they never say, it's like, hi, Tina, how's it going? I mean, Tina would just come back immediately, what do you care? You know, you don't care. You just want to see me fail. It's like, oh, there's Tina, all right. So that's the meet and greet. And that is, hello, how are you? Do you want some coffee? How's the kids? Really, really, really try to just get past all that with exposition. She invited Tina in, and, you know, Tina took a seat on the bar stool next to me. You don't have to do, hey, how are you? Where are you from? I met Jay, Jay comes, a guy comes in the bar, can I, and wants to sit down. You just say, a guy with a handlebar mustache sits down next to me. You don't have to go, hey, how are you? Where are you from? Who cares? Nothing's happening yet. So he sits down, you know, offers to buy me a drink. I don't have to say, can I buy you a drink? The cowboy offered to buy me a drink. I said, I already had a drink. Um, and he seemed crushed by that. His mustache did something. Um, and then wait until they're going to say something interesting before you begin having people actually in live dialogue. That's what exposition is for. Think of your dialogue as a racehorse. So in racing, it's all about how much weight the horse is carrying. Well, you don't put the bathtub and the kitchen sink and a couple of skis and um, cast iron pans and whatever onto that horse. You keep him as light as possible so he really can run. That's the only thing that a dialogue scene is for, is conflict. So until you are going to have conflict, you don't need people's lips to move. What else can I ask? Can I answer here? Favorite dialogue? Whose dialogue is super good? I mean, John Irving is always good. Dialogue is always sharp. Um, it's very funny if you look at, there's a lot of authors have their how to write books, which I generally tell people to avoid those books unless you want to write like that character. And one of the books, I want to say it was, who's the guy who does, 52 Pickup, that guy. Um, it's a mystery writer who has a book on how to write, but it's really how to write like him. And one of the things he says is don't describe things, just do the dialogue. And to me, that's a screenplay. You know, it would be, he's teaching you how to write like him, but he is not necessarily, to take out the dialogue. Elmore, that's right. Elmore Leonard, that's exactly right. And I love Elmore Leonard, but there are a lot more tools to fiction writing that you can use than Elmore Leonard uses. You know, he tends not to have any description, and he has strict dialogue, and people just talk, and that's the way he does it. Oh, James Baldwin, that's interesting. That his dialogue doesn't use description and other things in his dialogue scenes. I don't remember that standing out. Um, or you mean he writes good dialogue? He does write really good dialogue. A lot of people write good dialogue. Um, but you have to watch the people who, when you pick it up, you just see chugga 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 down the page. That's usually some pretty bad writing. Um, Not always, but usually. Yeah, yeah. Baldwin is fantastic. Um, who else writes really good dialogue? Styron writes good dialogue. Didion writes amazing dialogue. Stone. Um, I can't think of anybody right off the bat, but take a look at your bookshelf and start looking at the dialogue, um, and see who handles it well. So I think brings us to a close. If anybody has other questions about dialogue, this was a real short um, overview of the. Oh, good. I'm glad. So this was a short. This was Lagno. See, you guys have the handles, and then I can't. I don't know who you are, but thanks me for today's topic is just what I need right now. Good, good. All right. Well, I wish you all the best. Good writing, and we'll see you next week. Oh, Bozena, hi. And we'll see you next week for Writing Wednesday. Okay, bye.